Greetings and thank you very much for taking the time to join us in this webinar today. My name is Emmanuel Sauceda. I am a business development executive at Mexicali, DC. We are a nonprofit organization in the city of Mexicali, Mexico, just across the border with California in a privileged location, since we are 2 hours away from San Diego and 4 hours away from LA and Arizona. The topics that we are going to discuss and focus on during our webinar are Mexico versus China, the IMMEX program, shelter and ramp-up support, some USMCA highlights, Mexico's reactivation plan amidst COVID-19, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to business development executives, Didier Resendiz from IBEMSA and Carlos Loyola from Prodensa. During this webinar, we'll have 3 sections. The first part, we will learn from Didier and his expertise on reshoring operations to Mexico and the IMX program, best known as Maquiladora program. In the second part, we'll have Carlos Loyola sharing important information about the shelter program and some USMCA highlights. And in the third section, we'll talk about Mexico's reactivation plan amidst COVID-19. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them through our chat, either during the presentation or at the end of it. We'll get them. As we are all aware, Mexico in 2019 became the first trade partner with the US, making Mexico even a more logical option for investment and nearshoring. And to approach this topic in a more detailed way, I'll invite Didier to start with his presentation. Didier, good morning.
Hello, good morning, and thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today in this webinar. My name is Didier Resendiz. I work in the Business Development Department for IBEMSA. And I would like to start this conversation with a quote from Mr. Martin Toscano. He's the managing director of Ebonic Mexico. And if you want to continue, Emmanuel, please. He said, international companies already active in Mexico who are looking to relocate some or all of their manufacturing bases away from China could benefit Mexico substantially, given that it offers a sustainable local supply, but at only a marginally higher cost initially. And well, let's talk about what's happening right now. The fact that the virus originated in China, the major manufacturing hub, led to disruption in global supply chains of basic goods and gave rise to speculation that some companies will seek alternative production bases. Indeed, international reaction was swift. While COVID-19 has already accelerated the debate around such relocations, it is not a new phenomenon in itself. And in recent years, actually, rising production costs coupled with increased tariffs implemented as part of the US-China trade war have seen businesses steadily move their factories and plants out of China in favor of more competitive markets. But if the pandemic has taught us anything, is that nowhere in the world is safe from the fallout, and that the practice of zigzagging goods around the world is increasingly risky. The result is that companies are no longer just worried about being overly dependent in China. They're worried about being dependent on any geographic location. The US, well, or maybe for US or US focused firms, Mexico, as Emmanuel said already, the largest trade partner of the US, stands out as a logical option, with significant industrial and aviation activities in the market, and manufacturing industry, particularly in the automotive and the aerospace sectors, and trade benefits with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or well known as the USMCA. The country is well positioned to integrate itself further into global supply chains after the pandemic. In fact, the 2020 International Trade and Trends in Mexico survey revealed that a large majority of executives were already planning to move business to Mexico from China within the next 1 to 5 years, and 80% of them plans to make the decision within the next 2 years. So this is important. And due to the country's cost effectiveness through Mexican labor rates, the IMX program, shipping costs as well, and free trade deal with the US-Mexico, well, Mexico is the go-to option for many right now. The ongoing competition between China and Mexico had begun to swing heavily in Mexico's favor due to several reasons. Next, please, Emmanuel. Okay, about logistics. For instance, the proximity to Mexico is much closer for US companies than China. It's far easier to travel to facilities south of the border versus a flight that may take almost a full day of travel. To spend a day visiting facilities or working with operation managers on a regular basis is easier and more efficient when traveling across the border versus traveling across the globe. It's far easier to check on the quality of production firsthand since Mexico is closer than China. Just to give you an example, finished goods from a Mexico border city could take 4 to 8 hours to reach the US after leaving your plant in Mexico. From China, it could take nearly 3 weeks to arrive. It is also less costly. Shipping products from China costs and takes longer than receiving finished goods from Mexico to a US destination. It is more advantageous when managing supply and demand, as well as maintaining successful workflows, out of which deliver greater profitability of the manufacturer. In Mexico, it takes 1 week to ship a 40-foot container to the US, compared to China, where it takes almost 5 weeks and costs more than the double it costs in Mexico. So also time differences are also more conducive to business when manufacturing in Mexico versus China. To give you an example, when it's 8 a.m. in Detroit, Michigan, it is 8 p.m. in Shanghai. That means that any urgent communication must take place outside of business hours or wait until the next day. Typically, US companies communicate with their Mexico factories on the same or similar work schedule. Next, please, Manuel. Okay, labor cost. Labor rates in China have been rising and surpassed those in Mexico about 10 years ago, while rates in Mexico have stayed fairly stable. Mexican labor costs are still lower than China's wages, with Mexico having a higher level of productivity. Statistics show manufacturing labor costs per hour in China are $5.80, compared to Mexico, that is $4.10. Mexico also offers steady wage increases and changes that companies can predict and plan for in advance. Plus, there are protocols in place through the USMCA that protect workers' health, safety, and wages. Next, please, Emmanuel. Okay, Mexico has prioritized efforts in education and training. And there are higher education institutions where trade skills, design programs, and hands-on experience are part of the curriculum. On average, Mexico graduates around 150,000 engineers annually. These skilled workers follow a 48-hour work week, which helps increase production while still delivering top quality. And believe me, when moving, many companies save up to 30% when moving operations to Mexico on labor only due to the difference on hourly wages. Next, please. Okay, this is important. I'm going to start with an example about intellectual property. One of the main industries that manufacture in Mexico is electronic components and companies. And I'm talking about big companies such as Samsung, Panasonic, LG. Since the process of them often contains highly sensitive materials, it is important for companies to know their intellectual property is safe and protected. The country's IP laws are similar to those enforced by the US and Canada, whereas Chinese entities are responsible for between $225 to $600 billion annually on intellectual property theft experienced by US companies. This is serious. Mexico's IP protection exceeds the standards set first by NAFTA and now by the USMCA. Mexico's legal framework offers protection of industry secrets, imposes heavy privacy penalties, and allows companies to patent pharmaceuticals. Currently, Mexico participates in 14 international agreements that protect intellectual property, while 40% of online goods in China are counterfeit. Next, please. Okay, about IMEX program. IMEX program stands for Maquiladora Manufacturing and Export Services. So what is a maquiladora? A maquiladora is a factory in Mexico that is owned and run by a foreign company. That company manufactures products in Mexico and exports them to other countries. One of the main cost-saving benefits of this program is that the company is able to defer taxes when importing raw goods, materials, and equipment for manufacturing processes as well. They also pay lower tariffs when exporting finished goods to the US, and that's a very good benefit of this program. Mexico's IMX program was introduced in 2006 and replaced the former Maquiladora program that had already been in the market for around since the 60s, I believe. The IMX program benefit US and other foreign manufacturers that wish to operate a manufacturing or assemble facility in Mexico. It also allows automotive, metal mechanic, metal devices, electronic components, among others, to import temporary goods, machinery, and equipment free of import tax or VAT. This delivers a substantial cost benefit as these types of companies create new products to export back to the US. Another benefit of the program is Mexico's geographical location. As I said, establishing facilities closer to central business markets than China saves on production time, costs, and quality assurance. The closer proximity to the US allows manufacturers to visit their operation sites more easily and communicate with their teams during the standard business hours. Due to this and other prime advantages, manufacturing in Mexico is a competitive choice for companies that seek cost effectiveness and high quality production. However, with these benefits come strict requirements and compliance regulations. It's not easy, but it's totally doable. It's not impossible as well. In order to take advantage of the IMEX program and set up an operational facility in Mexico, there are several moving parts that must all be completed before production can begin. Believe me, it is best to seek the guidance of a shelter provider or a consultant that already has experience on setting maquiladora licenses and a deep understanding on the ins and outs of what's required. Next, please. Okay, well, manufacturing in Mexico means little to no risk, especially when under the guidance of a shelter company. Then this is going to talk more about my colleague Carlos. The shelter services include maintaining all permits, licenses, and ensuring the company is in complete compliance with Mexican laws. This allows US business to set up shop without the need to create a Mexican entity. Companies still maintain control of the business in Mexico and also oversee factory production. The shelter company does the rest, such as site selection, provide a legal presence, and handle all the administrative tasks of the operation. My colleague Carlos will talk more about it next. But finally, the truth is that COVID-19 continues to make an impact on a global level through travel restrictions, quarantines, and a heavy disruption to the global economy. With limited resources, supply chains, and employees to carry the brunt of how this pandemic has affected the US, it makes sense for manufacturers to diversify their operations even more than before. As I said, proximity, productivity, cost effectiveness, IP protection, and plus global opportunities such as trade deals between the USMCA and the effect of the coronavirus have only added benefits of moving operations to Mexico. Now I'm gonna give the word to my colleague Carlos Loyola, and he's gonna talk more about the shelter processes and the ramp-up start operations. And there you go, Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didier, for your interview and sharing your expertise on these topics. We'll give a couple of seconds for Carlos, who had a technical issue. He'll join us shortly. In the meantime, thank you, Didier, for the topic that you've been talking to us. It's very important and very valuable information. And as we are going to begin talking about the shelter program, we'll like to wait a couple of minutes. If you have questions, please send them through our chat. We've had a couple of questions already in our inbox. So I saw a couple of people raising hands. So if you could please send us your question through our chat, we'll thank you so that we can share them at the end of the session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Okay, right now we have a question right now from Peter Ryan. Peter is asking, how do you see the focus of the current U.S. administration around walls will impact cross-border trade? Will this have a negative impact on border communities from a goods and services trade angle?
Okay, can I answer that right now?
Yes, you may.
Excellent. Well, about how is this going to affect, definitely right now the border is actually open. It's open for businesses and for emergency purposes. This may not affect that much right now because in the United States as well recognize Mexico as one big and very important trade partner. So the construction of walls, I see it's more about political compromises, but political engagements, and more than if it really affects the economy or our businesses. Businesses have to move on, definitely. The worst that can happen is to stay calm and to mitigate the economy of both countries. And this cannot stop. We have to continue make businesses with the U.S. and U.S. must be more. It needs to be more flexible to develop business with us. I would like to know also the answer.
Thank you, Didier, for answering the questions. Now we have Carlos again in our webinar. So Carlos, you may introduce yourself.
Thank you, guys. Sorry for the technical difficulties over here. Good morning. My name is Carlos Loyola. I am Business Development Director for Grupo Prodensa, and today I will be explaining a little bit more regarding the shelter operator, and also just very briefly touching about the USMCA agreement that will come into force on July 1st. Okay, so if you could put on the next slide, please. So when setting up operations in Mexico, there are different options that manufacturers can pursue, each one associated with different costs, risks, implications, and benefits. The shelter operation is one of those options, but in very brief, I will explain a little bit on the different options in a general way. So the option in which there is less risk is using a contract manufacturer. So basically just hiring a company that has already operations in Mexico, has an IMMEX program, and they can produce, transform, or do any kind of a product for you guys. And basically they will be just another supplier in your supply chain. And that would be the easiest and fastest way to set up an operation in Mexico. The second easiest and fastest way to set up an operation in Mexico is through a shelter operator, in which the Mexican entity basically belongs to a third party. And that third party is the one that will operate with their name, with their IMX program, and all of the different registration certifications and licenses that you will need in order to operate and comply with Mexican regulation. The other options are outsourcing. So basically outsourcing some parts of the responsibilities in terms of administration or compliance to external councils, consultants, or companies similar to us. The other one would be doing a joint venture with an already established Mexican company. This has proven over the years to be definitely tough. So that's why it is on that side with more risk and liability. And the one that would significate more risk and liability is to do it all by your own. Definitely, regulation in Mexico has proven to be tough when companies decide to do it completely by themselves. So it is always suggested to have advisory in Mexico with companies that already know the right way to do it. Okay, next, please. So talking about the shelter and operation, the shelter program is a program that is allowed by the federal government, in which allows a foreign manufacturer to have an operation in Mexico through a third party. So the Mexican entity is owned, and the legal shareholders are the shelter providers. And in response to that, because we as shelter providers, we have all of the risks and liabilities because we are the legal owners and representatives of that entity, it is in our best interest to have that that company in full compliance every time, any day, in any regulation that applies. Why? Because if there is any kind of fine or any kind of wrongdoing, we as shelter operators and legal shareholders and owners of that entity, we are the responsible, even sometimes, for paying fines because of any wrongdoing or misinterpretation of the law. And the way in which it works is the Mexican entity signs a maquila contract. That's how we know it, how we call it, in which the foreign entity is contracting the Mexican entity to do any kind of transformation, product, or service, and the final product will be sent abroad again as part of the IMEX regulation. Next, please. So given that the Mexican entity, as I said, it belongs to the shelter operator, also the IMEX program and the VAT certification belong to the same shelter entity, but works very similar to as if we're an independent maquiladora. And we are able to import all of the raw material, machinery, and equipment under a temporary basis, basically as a normal IMEX operation. The machinery and equipment can remain in Mexico for as long as the project is alive, so there is no temporarily on that. But the raw material have, depending on the country of origin, depending on the harmonic tariff code, does require for it to be sent back to its country of origin, depending on different times. So the shelter provider as a whole, we act as integral facilitators for all regulatory compliance, and we keep up to date all aspects and do work as advisors for the company to be always in compliance, up to date, and assuring all of the compliance with and minimizing any fines for any wrongdoings. We also support in different areas of service. We help with different suppliers, the employee services like bus transportation, cafeteria, etc. As we have, we are a one large single account for many of these services, so we get even very, very good and competitive rates. Next, please. So very quickly and summarizing the shelter benefits, it is one of the fastest ways to start up in Mexico. It can go from 3 to up to 6 months, depending on the modality, but it is very quick in comparison to doing it completely by your own. You have a lower learning curve because the shelter operator acts as an advisor and helps the team that is involved in the Mexican operation to understand the Mexican environment and Mexican regulations. We go hand by hand during all the setup and all of the process, even during the pre-operational, operational, and also during the phase out of the shelter. It's a safe option, reduces liabilities and exposure. We are very very interested in the full compliance of the operation, as I said, because we are completely liable of that. We maximize savings because we use also economies of scale. Probably for the beginning of a project, for example, you do not require to have a full staff for your HR department or your international trade compliance department. So we use economies of scale because we can assign resources from our team to be handling 1, 2, or 3 projects at the same time. So that's why it can be cost efficient also. You have complete control of your operation also. Very important. We operate with full transparency, and it's very important also to add that we do not touch the product. We do not focus on manufacturing. We are only focused on the administration side of the business. So everything regarding quality, your manufacturing processes, etc., we do not touch. It's more it's focused on the administration and compliance side. Focus on production also. I mean, we are very, very keen on helping you be very competitive and productive, efficient. And we have an experienced staff from day to day. Of course, our team of experts will act as advisors, as I said, during the day-to-day operations to be in full compliance. Next, please. Very easily, this is how the flow of materials would look like with the shelter structure. So you have the foreign entity sending the machinery, tooling, raw materials to Mexico. All of these are sent under consignment. So the ownership remains with the parent company, and it's only in Mexico with the maquiladora agreement under consignment and on a temporary basis. Then after the products suffer a transformation or the finished product is ready, you can do either an export delivery directly to your customer abroad in wherever that is. It can be in the US, Canada, France, or wherever. Or you can have also what we call the virtual operations, in which we transfer the products, the finished products, to your customers in Mexico through a virtual delivery. It's basically for customs. It is as if you were going to do an exportation, but the product never leaves the national territory. It's only a documentation process, basically. Next, please. This is a very good example of how a structure under a shelter operation would look like. The boxes that are in green are the activities or responsibilities that the foreign manufacturer will continue to have, and the boxes that are in blue are the ones in which the shelter operator focuses the efforts. So as I said, we do not touch the product. Everything regarding to manufacturing, maintenance, quality, and scheduling, that continues to be part of the responsibility of the customer. Also sales and customer service, as well as materials, inventory management, and direct purchasing material. Everything else related to administration is on our field. So everything related to import and export, customs, and freight coordination, our team will be directly your international trade compliance team, basically. Everything related to general administration, accounting, taxes, treasury, finance, accounts payable, and receivable in Mexico. Also, we would be taking care of that. Very importantly, human resources. This is one of the most challenging departments, as you know, everywhere in the world. I mean, in terms of human resources, we are experiencing changes in cultures, changes in values. So it's very important to have very detailed analysis and extra attention on this department. But we as your partners in Mexico would help you on this side. So human resources, payroll, recruiting, and hiring. And this goes from the basic operator position all the way to the plant manager. Also everything related to labor and union matters as well. And also in Mexico, we have pretty strict rules regarding environmental health and safety. and mostly gaining more importance on these times. So everything regarding the compliance of this department would also be in our field or our responsibility. Next, please. So as an overview, the shelter operator, we support our customers on the administration side of the business, as I said. So everything related to accounting, reporting, and taxes, the human resources department also, everything regarding legal and the general administration, import and export and customs compliant, and environmental health and safety. The foreign manufacturer or the customer in this case would be sending the raw materials and components, direct and indirect, from abroad or purchasing it from Mexico. Also, they will continue to be focused on their production and manufacturing processes, as well as quality, delivery, compliance, and selection of key positions, which we would do hand by hand. We would require your input in order to hire those positions. Also, engineering and technical support, and everything else basically is a pass-through cost. We do it 100% pass-through. That is that no overhead, no commission, nor whatsoever, but everything is completely transparent in terms of the salaries and benefits that your team in Mexico or your workforce will be receiving. The cost of utilities as well, electricity, natural gas, water, etc. Also the leasing cost in case that you decide to lease a building, logistics, as well as maintenance for your own building or any of your equipment. Thank you. So moving up with the agenda, I will very briefly discuss on the USMCA, which, as you may know, will come into effect on July 1st. So we're basically one week away from this new treaty to come into effect. So the USMCA will definitely modernizes NAFTA's discipline, because NAFTA, which was signed in the beginning of the 1990s, there were several topics that did not consider, given the economy that we had back in the day. So it's very important because, for example, the USMCA takes into consideration digital commerce, e-commerce, and some of the other services that are done by digital platforms. Also guarantees certainty in trade and investments. So the regulatory framework is a lot more complete, considering a lot of the different businesses that have gained importance in the last couple of years. It definitely strengthens North America's competitiveness, trying to put it as one of the most modern and most comprehensive agreements in the world, and also is inclusive and responsible for regional trade. Next, please. So some of the main changes regarding the USMCA versus NAFTA, is very important to clear out that the USMCA is not a NAFTA 2.0. It's a treaty by its own. It's completely different, to be honest. And it even consists of 34 chapters in comparison to the 22 that were part of NAFTA. So it's a lot of analysis that has to be done in order to fully understand the new USMCA. Important also that we have the term is for 16 years, and we have the sunset clause with revisions every 6 years in order to continue adapting it to the new trends and businesses. We have very strict labor laws and independence of workers for representation. This is one of the main challenges that we currently have, and it will impact mainly the automotive industry. But of course, it will also impact the rest of the industry. The automotive industry by itself is the one that is affected or impacted the most. So it's very important to put extra attention on this. And also consolidates the current level of openness to foreign investment between the USMCA partners. It is no secret that the US, Canada, and Mexico continue to strengthen their relationships in terms of business, in terms of trade, of basically everything. So the openness continues and it strengthens this. Next, please. Also, as I said before, the regulatory framework for investors and investments on each country is a lot more strict, and that is in order to give more protection and certainty to investors. It also modifies the rules for dispute of settlement. It includes the digital trade, as I said before, because that NAFTA did not have it. Includes also financial services and other services that can be done digitally. There is a new chapter on small and medium-sized enterprises, which in the first NAFTA were basically left outside of the agreement because back in that time, Mexico did not have a large small or medium-sized companies. So this one does consider them in order to give them more incentives to or easiest ways to operate and start. Also, it modifies the current intellectual property regulations to give more certainty as well. And the rules of origin do change for several industries. This is one of the topics that will be the talk of the day for the following weeks because the rules of origin do change for most of the industries, mainly for aerospace, automotive, and other industries. Which will require for companies to readapt their strategies in terms of their supply base. I will not get much into detail with this because it's a discussion by its own, but it is important to have it in mind. Next, please. So just as a wrap up, how the process was. And coming into effect in July 1st. So next week, we will see the first day of the new USMCA being implemented. So in December 2019, it was approved by the Mexican Senate, and by April 2020, we concluded the internal proceedings. In the US, it was approved in January 2020. And also in April, the conclusion of internal proceedings happened in April 2020. And in Canada, it was approved in March by the Parliament. And also the conclusion of internal proceedings happened in April. All of this made it possible for this new treaty to come into effect on July 1st. There are still in Mexico, sorry, it's okay, go ahead. There are still in Mexico some details still going into Congress. Most of those changes, not necessarily changes, but most of those things that will happen in the following days are more clarifications more than anything. So the Mexican government have declared that they are ready to implement it and ready to go, basically. So what does this mean for your company in Mexico if you already have a manufacturing operation here? Well, regarding the supply chain, as I said, this is one of the most important topics because you do have to rethink your supply chain strategy. Considering the rules of origin and the local value that has to be implemented, then definitely you will have to consider reshaping this area of your manufacturing facility. You will need to develop suppliers that are compliant with the USMCA, also very important. And as I said, well, transformation in the whole supply chain. Regarding international trade compliance, well, there will be proceedings and formalities, self-certification of origins of goods to be documented, compliance on regulations, as I said, rules of origin, support and documentation, also financial impact, because there will be some duties and quotas that could happen if your raw material or products do not comply with the new rules of origin. And also increase customs control and training for your international trade compliance team. This because mainly the three countries have agreed to a more common framework in terms of customs There will be a lot of updates to be done, and it's very important for your team to be fully aware of these changes. Then regarding human resources, there is the freedom of association and collective negotiation for workers and new relation with unions. This will mainly affect Mexico, given that in most parts of Mexico, we have operated basically with a non-union environment. So we have to speed up and get up to date on this. There will be political pressure from the US and the Mexico government on the labor compliance, and the need for institutional and public relation policies. This also very important. You will have to put extra attention on your public relations strategies because of the importance that communities will have on your operation. You cannot consider yourself to be operating in Mexico only as a cost center, but you also have to be a community player and also have good relation with the institutions that are in your community. And also regarding the information technologies and digital transformation, well, the MRP systems will be aligned and unified to trade compliance, the development of interfaces for procedures and formalities of import and export, which are continued to be adapted right now, and the tools or global systems of information technologies, the Amber Road integration point. So that is in a nutshell what it means for companies that already have manufacturing facilities in Mexico regarding the changes with the USMCA. Next slide, please. Okay. So Didier will take over from now on. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Carlos. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what are the actions that Mexico is doing right now, and basically. To start, on May 14, 2020, the federal government of Mexico published a plan to gradually reopen social, academic, and economic activities in Mexico. The plan was designed by the Mexican General Health Council, where certain actions were implemented to prepare the reopening of economic activities, such as the creation of health protocols, personal training for safety in the work environment, reconditioning of workspaces and productive processes, also the implementation of filters for entry, sanitation, and hygiene of the workplace. Many measures that we're going to mention next. Basically, also construction, mining, and manufacturing of transportation equipment were deemed essential activities and commenced operations on June 1st of this year. They implemented strict protocols to safeguard the health and safety of their employees. Also, on June 1st, the Mexican Department of Health implemented a color-coded traffic light system that this is going to be used on a weekly basis, and it is for the reopening of social, educational, and economic activities. This phase will include the reopening of establishments performing non-essential activities as well. These color codes that are red, orange, yellow, and green will be used to evaluate public areas, public and work safety measures, essential and non-essential activities, and vulnerable population and demographic, and also educational activities as well. As you can see on color red, only essential activities will be permitted, including the 3 new sectors mentioned before, which are mining, construction, and transportation manufacturing. Also on the orange, this includes non-essential services in a limited capacity. Basically, public spaces are able to reopen with limited capacity. Vulnerable population is allowed to go back to work, taking all necessary safety precautions, working limited shifts, and working in designed workspaces. On the yellow segment, all essential and non-essential activities will be allowed to work without any restrictions. Only outdoor public areas are allowed to open with minimal restrictions. However, indoor areas such as restaurants, movie theaters, and gyms, for example, will still enforce strict safety measures. Schools will remain closed in this section. On the green section is basically there are no restrictions at all in daily activities, and the schools are reactivated as well. In addition, the government has clarified special health and safety measures. These are mandatory for all companies, regardless of their size and industry. You can see it here, but I'm going to mention some of them. For example, the first one is to create a committee or appointment of a responsible person to supervise and follow up on COVID-19 related measures. I'm sorry, Manuel, I didn't say next, but thank you. And these are the measures. Categorize activities in the workplace to identify the health and safety measures that the company needs to implement. Of course, maintain awareness of the traffic light system indicated by the federal government and of any additional health and safety measures that need to be implemented. Ensure the correct implementation of health and safety measures in the workplace. Establish physical barriers between workstations if the production processes permits, also if the service is permitted. Otherwise, provide signage that ensures that people are at least 5 feet apart from each other. Take body temperature upon entrance and exit of employees to the workplace. Implement control guidelines for access and exit of visitors, vendors, and suppliers to the workplace. Maintain cleaning and sanitization protocols and material for daily cleaning surfaces, contact, and common use objects. And well, many others. As you can see, one of the last ones, maintain appropriate mechanism to identify symptomatic employees, their contacts, and communities, and maintain guidelines of how to act in case of an employee is COVID-19 symptomatic to protect the employee, co-workers, and family. This guide shall include how to handle suspected employees, contacts, confinement of the employee, and reincorporation to the workplace. This is very important. Finally, the authority will continue exercising inspections in order to preserve controls and implement additional hygiene measures as required. So everything, the most important thing here is that the worker must feel secure and safe in the workplace. That's the most important thing that the government is taking care of right now. So the real deal is we don't need to go in panic. We need to stay calm and to activate as well. And thank you very much to hearing us, both of us. Emmanuel, I'm going to give you the word.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your input. It's been very viable information that you have all shared to all the public that are watching our webinar right now, either on our Zoom meeting or in our Facebook page live as well. We'll now enter into a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please send them right now. We've got some already. So we start asking some of them. We only have more or less 10 minutes for this session. So Carlos and Didier, I will start mentioning some of the questions that the public has sent us. First from Ulises Salas. He's asking, the cost of the products in China are cheap enough to cover other expenses you have mentioned?
Okay, about products in China, I don't know if they are daily basis products or energy about utilities. It depends, of course, in the type of operation that you have in China. The cost mentioned here are production costs and labor rates. Basically, that is our main advantages, and also in terms of quality of the products as well. I will need more detail about what it means about cost of the products in China. I don't know what do you think about it, Carlos?
Yeah, I don't completely understand. The cost of products in China are cheap enough to cover other expenses you have mentioned. The reality is that, I mean, at least from my side, a proper analysis has to be done, a proper assessment in order to understand the case by case, what are the savings that a project made in Mexico would have against doing it in China.
That's correct.
I do agree that if you put into the formula the logistic cost and the labor cost increases that China is experiencing right now, there should be savings enough to have that operation in Mexico instead of China. But as I said, I do think that a proper assessment has to be done, even trying to understand what market you're trying to target because if you are, of course, trying to target the Asian market, definitely Mexico still could potentially not make much sense. And even with all this that we're seeing regarding nearshoring, reshoring, but in summary, the regionalization of supply chain. So if your target market is the Americas, then yes, Mexico does make sense, and it does have a lot of things to offer in order for you to be more competitive. But if your target market is in Asia, China, Japan, or other parts of the world, then also China can be more competitive. So it's regarding where your supply chain and also your target market is.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Peter Ryan. He's asking, what are the opportunities for outsourcers to set up U.S. nearshore focused operations in Mexicali?
If I may, well, there are opportunities definitely to set operations in Mexicali. In Mexicali as a whole, and I will let Emmanuel to explain a little bit more better or more in detail. But Mexicali, the city of itself, is very competitive. Mexicali has a very stable and workforce, and also a lot of people available still. Um, the cost of logistics, given that it is in the border, it definitely makes it an ideal location for U.S. manufacturers looking to nearshore their operations. So yes, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities that Mexicali can offer. I will let Emmanuel explain more on that.
And just to add, yes, I will completely agree with Carlos. Definitely, Mexicali is a very competitive place for nearshore operations, also for outsourcers. Definitely, the geographical location also benefits a lot to the city, and the skill force is very important. It completely depends on the skill force. I feel like Mexicali is at a very good stage right now in terms of skilled people. And yes, definitely, there are good opportunities for outsources in Mexico. I don't know if you want to add something, Emmanuel.
Yeah, just a bit. We do have a lot of tier 1 and tier 2 companies established here in our city, and aerospace industry, medical devices industry, as well as automotive and many other industries. We have a very diversified types of industry here in Mexicali. We are not only relying on one, but we've got big players for many industries. We in Mexicali see, as well as Didier in IBEMSA and Carlos in Prodensa, we have the private and public side to help you with business seminars, business agendas, to know local suppliers. If you want to contract manufacture, or if you want to set up your own operations, we can help you with that. We have the contacts as well, the emails and phones from every one of the people that are here, from Didier, Carlos, and myself in Mexicali, DC. So whatever information and further questions you may have or inquiries, you can send us an email. You have our email in the Zoom mail that we sent. But as well, we'll share it to you personally with the email that you send us when you register to this webinar. So if there are no more questions, I think that we can wrap up the session. And thank you again, Carlos and Didier, for your time, for the expertise that you shared. I think it was pretty valuable and important information that we got here in this webinar. So thank you very much for the opportunity to hear from you, from your experience.
Thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you, Mexicali DC, for the opportunity. Perfect timing, 1 hour webinar. I feel very, very comfortable with the information we provide. And thank you, Carlos, as well, for the opportunity to connect with us for this information.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Didier, for sharing the screen with me. And well, stay safe, and we'll be in touch. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Take care. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.